Good morning, everybody, and I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Gary Stewart. I read it when you read your AAOS Now newsletter. There was a wonderful piece he wrote last July that really put together some of the to-do things that we can, as orthopedic surgeons, try to do in our own work around implicit bias. And so he is a board, so I asked him to come, and sorry we couldn't do it in person because I know he was looking forward to come to California, but we really appreciate his input. And we're also going to have a discussion group at following these two first sessions as well. Dr. Stewart's a board certified foot and ankle surgeon at Resurgence Orthopedics in Atlanta. It's one of the largest orthopedic groups in the country. He's co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. He completed his medical degree, residency, and fellowship at Drexel University in Philadelphia, yay Philly. And he's also, as a board member, he helps to oversee one of the largest orthopedic practices in the nation. He's part of the Wellstar Atlanta Medical Center Department of Orthopedic Surgery since 2013. And teaches residents and also works on leadership skills. So we are really looking forward to hearing his talk this morning, and thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Stewart.
Thank you. I'm going to get started. Let me share my screen, get my talk going, and thank you very much for inviting me. You are correct. I really was looking forward to coming to California to experience California. I've always been a big fan of that state, one of my favorite states. And so, but either way, I'm here and I'm happy to be with you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And so what we're going to talk about today, we're definitely going to hit on some type of biases and implicit biases, but I'm going to talk about how perfection is not required to talk about race. Okay. And so what I hope to do today is I hope to lay bare that why we should even be doing this and talk a little bit about context as why we should talk about race as orthopedic surgeons, some other meanings behind why it's important, talk about some biases and how they influence our patient care and influence our lives and how we can identify our own biases, as well as some tips on how we can get started on this process. And so without any further ado, let's get going. But what I will also say is I'm going to make some assumptions here. I'm going to make sure I'm just going to say that, you know, racism does exist and there are healthcare inequities that have to deal with race. And so those are things we're not going to debate today. We're just going to jump into that. So why am I here? Well, shoot, you know, 2020 was a year for the history books, and sometimes that was getting said previously, but it is the real deal now. And so, you know, coronavirus really laid bare the healthcare inequities, especially racial healthcare inequities in this country from the get-go in terms of death rates and people who are getting infected and being affected overall. And that combined with the triple murders, as we that do these type of talks talk about, in terms of the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, really laid bare and set a kind of torch to the dynamite of a social justice movement that really has never ended for African Americans in this country, but has really laid bare and brought it to the forefront of the country again. And so I wanted to put on the right of this talk, you know, We Stand With You was a wonderful letter that Dr. Bosco wrote last year during this 2020. And it really kind of helped a lot of us that are kind of screaming for support in the DEI community to move to our practices and say, hey, look, our trade union, the AAOS, the leaders are taking this seriously, so do we. So I was very proud of Dr. Bosco for his poignant remarks. And then in AOS Now, I never would have thought in my years as an orthopedic surgeon being involved in medicine that we would have had an article that laid bare that systemic racism is a public health crisis and is leading to the death of Black and brown people in disproportionate amounts. And Julie Samora, who's just a dynamic person, wrote this and really in a short article said a lot. And as well as Dr. Eric Carson, a good friend of mine, as well as the president of the Gladden Orthopedic Society, the Multicultural Society of the AAOS, in which he talked a lot about being a Black person, being a Black man, a Black orthopedic surgeon, a Black father, or a Black parent, and the things we go through here. And it wasn't a complaining tone, it was an explaining tone. So again, I put this slide here because again, the Academy has done, I won't call it the diversity push, but has had initiatives in place for a while, but is really starting to let them grow. And of course, no program is perfect, but the Academy is doing work here. And so I want to say that I support DEI in all facets, whether it be for transgender people, for those of different sexual orientations, for gender inequities, whether it be ageism, whether it be the whole spectrum. But today we'll be talking largely about race. But I just want to be clear that I support all aspects of it. And I think it's important for us to, especially as doctors, as we take care of patients that may be different from us. And so I put this slide here, right? So this slide talks about, in general, the number of doctors in the United States and their ethnic background. And then I put the changing demographics of our country. Now it's weird, you put that one on the left and it seems to kind of evoke emotions in people, but it's just the facts. And I tried to put this here so we could show that the population of doctors in the United States is largely white, for good or bad. And so if you're a white physician and you're taking care of people, you're largely going to be taking care of some people that don't look like you, may have a different background, may have different experiences in this country. And so if you're reticent to talk about race, well, then there's going to be things that you're going to be missing. Like you're going to be missing things in your interaction personally with your patients. You likely, if you're not doing the reading, miss out on some things that could better have your patients that are different from you do better in terms of their care. And so that's why it's important. Now, this is the population of all doctors, right? Orthopedic surgery is largely white and male. It just is, for good or bad. And so I put this here because I wanted to kind of highlight the fact that, you're going to be taking care of people that are different from you. Whatever your political affiliation, we all got into medicine to take care of people and we want to do it well. And so in order to do it well, you have to talk about race. And so that's why we're going to, have to highlight that we have to communicate, because orthopedics is not immune from this. You can do a simple Google search. And these were just a couple of the articles that I searched that highlighted how race is affecting the outcomes of patients negatively. And these are orthopedic patients, and it doesn't take you long to see that. I put this slide here because there have been articles on pipeline, but I want to approach it from a different way to say that, yes, the majority of orthopedic surgeons are white and male, but we don't really have a lot of other underrepresented minorities in the pipeline. If you had told me in 2000 or 2005, when I was training, that was the high watermark of underrepresented minorities in orthopedic surgery, I would have been very dismayed. And to look at these numbers, I am dismayed. So for those of you that are white, that are taking care of patients that are different from you, there are not a lot of people coming behind you to kind of, that may have an interest or have more of a kind of intuitive understanding of the patients that are Black and brown that are coming. And so we need you to, help figure this out. And that's why I'm here. Because, when this was going on and this pandemic was happening and raging last year, I had a number of my colleagues contact me and say, oh my goodness, this is real. I didn't know anything about it, which was shocking to me, but hey, they were being honest. And they were asking questions and wanted to know how to speak about race and were nervous about it. And I was not surprised, because the overwhelming number of my colleagues want to take care of patients. Again, it doesn't matter their political affiliations. And I am a firm believer that you have to be some form of sociopath to go through all the stuff we've done to get into medicine, pre-med, medical school, shelf exams, rotations. You want to go into orthopedics, you got to be a gunner, you're writing papers, you're trying to meet people, you do orthopedic residency. Oh my gosh, the boards are hard. You got to do world boards. Oh my goodness, I want to be attending. I got to find a job. What's the contract? These are tough issues. If you don't want to do it, you're not going to get through. And so I understand and wanted to say, I get it. I get why, when we start talking about race, people get fearful. They really do. You see this quote, and I believe it's from Lincoln. I saw it on the internet. I think Lincoln might have said it, but a lot of us quote this. But silence is something we can't do as physicians. We have to learn, we have to get better. And I put my guy 2 Chainz here from Atlanta to say, I get it. You know why I get it? Because if you look at this, this is a picture of kind of who I believe I am with the people I love most. And you know, I put kind of these 13 social identifiers on the left for a purpose, right? Because I had a friend of mine, Al Vivian, and for those of you who know the name Vivian, the last name Vivian, C.T. Vivian was a civil rights leader, was considered the field general for Dr. MLK. So Al Vivian, who was a captain in the United States military, kind of took over this company that was started by his father, Basic Diversity. And I just want to give him credit for the slide. But he did come to Resurgence Orthopedics, and he did some training for us in the field. And he was great. And he put this slide up to talk about social identity groups. And if you put these 13 social identity groups up, you know, I am, you know, in 10 of the 13. And we call them social identity group because the term privilege sometimes turns people off and they don't want to listen. So look, you can call it privilege, you can call it a social identity group. Either way, these things exist and they influence the way we're able to do things in this country. And so 10 of the 13 mainstream groups I'm in. So there's a lot of privilege that I have. And so me as a physician, when I'm taking care of people that are different from me, I want to get better at that. And so if you look at these social identifiers, there are things in here that I'm not a part of. And so if I'm going to take care of people who are part of that, then I need to learn and read. And in my DEI space, sometimes I look like this guy from the Key and Peele skit, sweating and I'm nervous because I'm just as fearful of you. However, in the United States of America, 2 to 3 things that I'm in are pretty doggone big. And again, we're not going to talk and try to delve whether these things are true. But, you know, racism does exist in the United States. I'm a descendant of enslaved people 150 odd years ago. And so we are still reeling from some of these things. Jim Crow was around for a long time. The guy in the Vietnam veteran hat could not come and take his mother out to dinner in his military uniform and sit in the front of the restaurant. So he just didn't take her out when he got back from getting shot for his country. So it's a big deal. And these are things that influence me. So I'm also here because, you know, we can throw some stones, right? It's really easy to look at the gentleman on the left who did an evil thing and will be punished for that. But, you know, hey, people aren't protecting and serving when they should. Well, guess what? We also took an oath to do something, right? And if you look and you do a simple PubMed search, we are not necessarily doing that. We're not necessarily doing what we need to do because there's documented literature on how racism is affecting the health of Black and brown people throughout this country. So this is part of my discussion to try to say, hey, you know, we need to do this. We've got to find a way to do it, or we're going to be doing more harm than good. And so that's what I'm saying. We took an oath to do no harm, basically, right? But not quite. The literature is out there that shows that structural racism exists. And if we're not being a part of the solution, if we're being quiet, I don't feel silence is an option. I feel like if we're not doing something about this, then we are part of the problem and we're complicit in it. And so I'm going to get started, and hopefully you didn't feel like this was too preachy, but I just felt like I needed to lay bare why we need to do this and why this isn't something that you can just be passive about, and why I am here talking to you on my OR day so that I can make sure we do this. And so let's talk about race, right? So I thought I laid bare why we should talk about race, the reasons why it is something that I'm even here for today, and hopefully to give you some tips. And I put Simone Biles here because there's absolutely no one that's more perfect than her in the gym, but we don't have to be perfect to talk about race. And so the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that we all have bias. We all are biased. And I put this comic here from the Baltimore Sun-Times because I get this one a lot, to be honest with you. I love my friends. I do. I love them. But you know, we're having these discussions and telling me they're colorblind. I'm like, come on, man. No one is colorblind. And part of it is that, you know, if you grew up 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s around there, you know, we were kind of taught this, and we were taught in order to be a good person, you had to see everyone as a certain way and not really see who they are. But that doesn't work, right? Number one, it doesn't work because we're all biased. Number two, it doesn't work because you need to positively acknowledge and affirm that humans are different. We have similarities, yes. For the most part, you're going to fix a standard ankle fracture the same, but there's also differences, right? Like there's differences in the type of ankle fractures. And so you have to be, and people are the same way. There's similarities and differences. You have to acknowledge that their biases influence your attitudes and actions. They just do. We're biased. It's not our fault. It's hardwired in our brains, and it was there to help protect us in certain situations when you don't have time to think. And that's what, implicit bias is for. And so we'll talk a little bit about implicit bias and explicit bias in case that's not something that we know about. And then you have to kind of create strategies once you identify your biases to overcome them individually. Are these something that are occurring also in your organization? Most likely. And so that also contributes to the problem if we're not addressing those things. And so we have to acknowledge bias so we can get by them. And so we also first need to seek to understand and be understood. Just some quick definitions. Implicit bias is the attitude or stereotype that affect our understanding and actions that are unconscious. If you hear us say implicit bias and unconscious bias interchangeably, it's because they are, right? This is things you aren't thinking about that cause you to be biased. Explicit bias, it's conscious. Your attitudes or belief, you know that you have them. For instance, hey, let's just say it, the N-word, if you're using it, you got some conscious bias that you just had. It's not unconscious, right? And so we're going to talk more about implicit bias because those are things that we don't necessarily know we have and are under our control. And so in order to identify your implicit bias, a good tool is this tool developed by a bunch of universities in Harvard in terms of the implicit association test. And I learned about this test as I was kind of getting into who I am and why I may feel this way. And it's surprisingly accurate. It really, really is. And so you go and take this test. They kind of show you some pictures and you read and kind of look at this graph and see, put your left finger here, your right finger there, and you're getting ready to take the test. They kind of flash these pictures really quickly. You can't take time or it invalidates it. And I guess they did some studies to figure out how you do this. And if you do the wrong thing, it gives you an X. And then at the end, it gives you a debriefing. Now I put this here because I didn't want to tell you the things that I got wrong, that I do have biases for, that I continue to work on as an orthopedic surgeon and as a person. But I will say I've worked really hard over my life to try to not have this racial thing going. Now, I will tell you, we all still do. But I put my other stuff here. So I had to take the test a bunch of times to get this result, but it'll give you a debriefing and it's surprisingly accurate. And what you'll find when I talk to other African Americans about this, other Black people about this, is sometimes we are more biased for white people and even biased against Black people. So it is a thing everyone should do because no one's perfect and we all have our biases, and sometimes we're biased against African Americans as well. This is a really complicated thing. That's why we need to talk about race. So once you acknowledge your bias, once you understand that you are biased and that we all have bias and that you're not a bad person because you're biased doesn't mean you're walking around with a hood on, a white hood on and screaming the N-word. It doesn't. It's something that we've all kind of through society picked up. And so once you identify your bias through the test and other ways, you can then kind of figure out, how am I going to address this? Why do certain things make me uncomfortable? And, you can kind of really look into yourself and then start making some changes. When I say while you're doing this, analyze some factual data. When Al Vivian was talking to us, we have a lot of confirmation bias, and we as orthopedic, clinician scientists understand that there are biases out there, whether it be sample bias, what have you. But, we have the things that we may have grown up with, things maybe our grandparents or our parents might have taught us about other people. We maybe internalize them consciously or not. And then you see someone do something that they told you those people do, and then you confirm it. Oh yeah, all those people are criminals. Oh yeah, all those people are dumb. All those people are mean. And again, conscious or unconsciously, this is something you may have done. And once you realize that may be something you're doing, you can kind of consciously combat it. One of the great ways, and we'll get into this, is to develop cultural informants with people so that you can kind of, understand these things. And we'll get to that in a minute. The next thing is being an effective listener. Now, this should be easy for docs, right? I mean, we sit in the room every day. I mean, if you can't take a good history, then you're not a good physician. But somehow when we're talking about things that we are kind of coming into that are a little bit different, we don't necessarily listen as much, all right? And so, you know, let's get into it. When you're taking a history on a patient, you are listening. Now, you're not just sitting back being silent. You know, your body language is there. Maybe you may be probing a little bit, but you're not inserting the narrative. The patient fell and they fell riding their bike. You're not like, you were going down the stairs, right? I mean, you don't do that. That's not what you do. The same thing when talking about race. When someone is telling their perspective on how they're treated as someone of a different race, but you don't say, well, but what about what if you hadn't have done that? No, listen to what they're saying, right? And so what I would say also, empathize, right? Don't sympathize, right? And as you know, when you're a good physician has very high empathy qualifications, right? We really can understand what's going on, and that helps us, the patient, feel more comfortable, especially where you're dealing with pain or a difficult injury. Again, don't insert your narrative. And I put this part in here in terms of empathy, because a lot of times we don't always understand what our colleagues are going through. And it was really great last year when people would empathize with me or text and say, man, this must really affect you. And I wanted to say, no, that, this doesn't affect you. But it does affect me in a significant manner. And they said, well, okay. But let's talk about an interaction. We still have some time to talk, okay? These are going to be some interactions we go over in our breakout room. And so I want you to read through this. But the gist of this first interaction is that after I wrote my article, I got a lot of orthopedic surgeons emailing me across the country to basically ask questions and talk about race. But none of them ever said, hey, give me a call. Let's kind of, maybe do a Zoom. Everyone put something about how they felt about a topic to me. So it didn't really seem like they wanted to have a discussion on race and how it made me feel or how we could get better in it. It seemed like they just wanted to push a narrative. And so I want you to also take time in this interaction of number 2 and basically say, hey, this doctor sounded like a great person, and that we had a little bit of a email back and forth that was very positive. And if you can kind of look at this, again, we'll deal with this in a breakout room probably, but he says the Black EMT, the lady has a name. He says the Socratic method. And so, Socrates, are you asking people to teach you stuff? And then, it kind of goes into the George Floyd, is a criminal, kind of, in my lens, sounds like maybe George Floyd deserved to be killed. Maybe, I don't know. And so this could have been helped if he had just kind of educated, himself a little bit and read, and I call it reading for the case. And let me break this down for you, right? So when you're training for orthopedic surgery, you don't go into the OR and use the Socratic method with your attending and say, hey, attending, why are you doing that with the femur fracture? You better have read first, right? Or you're gonna get it. You're gonna get it, right? I mean, from someone who teaches residents, nothing makes us irritated more when they haven't prepared for the case. And so the same thing applies when you're talking about race. I put some books here, right? These are some basic books that have facts in them. Whether you agree with them or not, these people have done the research, they've done the literature searches, they've included facts that you could research yourself. A lot of things are in here are things that we as African Americans either have read about, know intuitively. And so when you kind of just insert your own narrative without having this background, you're going to get in trouble as you talk about race. Here's another book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And here's some other books. Again, you don't have to agree with everything in these books, but you can do a little background reading so you could have a better conversation. If you're not a reader and you drive a lot and you're in traffic like me, well, pick a podcast. This one, Code Switch, was really enlightening on a lot of issues. And so it allows you to kind of, in the safety of your own headphones or car, learn some things. So here's what happened in interaction number 2, all right? You can kind of see, hey, he got written up, and there's some reasons why he was written up. Now, when you look at the end, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the breakout session. I was really dismayed by almost everything, but at the same time, the hospital administrator said, white people have to be on pins and needles right now and not discuss events like this, like somehow this is going to blow over. If you were doing total joint arthroplasty and you kept having dislocation after dislocation, at some point, it's not the patient's problem. It is maybe a technique problem. And then guess what? You would try to figure out what was wrong with your technique. If things like this are continuing to happen, then maybe there's a problem in the way we're having our conversations, and you can use some of these tools to get out of trouble or stay out of trouble. You also have to understand the power dynamic. Look, we're orthopedic surgeons. We know the deal. We make more money than most people. We also help the hospitals make money, or if we own the ASC, that's how we make money, by doing surgery. The people that work there get paid by either us at our own ASC or the hospital that pays them off the money they make by the things we do. And so that power dynamic is not equal, okay? And so you just kind of picking staff that rely on you for their livelihood and asking them on your opinion, it's not going to work, and it's likely not going to work out well. Cultural informants. Let's get into this. And I say, if you don't have some, find some. And what I will say to this is, before I get into how you find some, there's a podcast that Emmanuel Acho, an NFL player, kind of came up with, and I listened to it in advance of this talk. And what it is it's really great because he touches on a lot of topics that I talk about with my white friends and colleagues. And so they can get your answers almost before you even kind of talk to your Black friends or whatever. And, so you don't overwhelm them with your questions. And when I say, if you don't have some, find some, you got in orthopedics, right? We know how hard that is. And if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you have to have some emotional intelligence to figure out how to interact with people. And it's not just something so you could take advantage of that person being different, but you genuinely want to get to know that person and broaden your horizons in space. And it takes time to develop cultural informant. And what is a cultural informant? A cultural informant is a person that is pretty much embedded in another society, in another group per se, an other group that you have a mutual, and let me say mutual trust with. You trust them and they trust you, so they can give you some grace and generosity when having difficult conversations. And so as we end this discussion, once you do all these things, you acknowledge your bias, you listen, you educate yourself, read for the case, understand who you're talking to, have cultural informants, and start getting into it. You know what? If you really, about doing this, speak up, right? It's like a pre-op timeout. If you see something wrong in the OR, someone's about to operate on the wrong leg, or you want your resident, your scrub tech to speak up. So if you, kind of learn more things, say something is wrong if it's there. I'll tell you a little story as we have just a little bit more time. I was a resident and we were in conference, and a well-known trauma surgeon talked about posterior wall fractures. And he said, African-Americans seem to have a certain posterior wall fragment because they drive with a bucket of chicken in their lap. What am I supposed to say to that? Everyone is in a conference and there's some nervous laughter, some genuine laughter, and some people like me like, what the heck is that about? Well, those are things that perpetuate problems. Things like Black people don't need medicine, they're falsehoods. If you hear that, speak out. If you have a Black colleague who is mistaken for the transporter cleaning staff, speak out, because it's really draining. It's called a microaggression for me. These are little things that happen throughout your day that just kind of drain your soul. And I tell you, they really do. I hear people poo-pooing them. Maybe they shouldn't be called micro because people think they're small, but they're real. Sometimes I'm in a room with a patient and my patient will subconsciously defer to my resident who I'm training. And it is always affirming, really, when the resident is like, this is my attending, this is my boss, you should really listen to them. And it doesn't have to be that type of dynamic, because there is a power dynamic there, but you could be walking in a room with one of your colleagues and this can happen. And I'll say to this, keep learning, all right? Use what you learn. Make use of your privilege, to uplift people and amplify efforts of the Black and brown colleagues. And when I mean privilege, that doesn't mean that if you grew up on a farm working your butt off that you had it easy. That's not the type of privilege I'm talking about. I'm talking about the social identifiers that put you in the mainstream in which your culture is dominant, okay? And I'm in some of those things as well. And that's why I'm here today. I have the ability to pause my work and come and talk to folks in California about things that are important. Make real changes in your life. Do like Dr. Anderson did, right? And she saw that there's someone that has some knowledge and brought them in from Atlanta to California. And if you give grand rounds, maybe there's a Black nephrologist that would love to talk about kidney function that you consulted with and you built up a rapport with. They would love that opportunity to boost themselves up. And that allows you to be a true ally, not just a Twitter ally when you hit, like when there's some, residents that, maybe there's a Black female that matched and you hit the like button. Well, that's great, but maybe if you could get involved in some mentorship with that person, and when you hear someone say something denigrating to them, you speak up. That's a true ally, whether people are watching or not. And so keep educating yourself, right? So the enemy of good is better, right? We all know that. How many times have you said that when you almost had the fracture right and you wanted to just do it one more time, and then, man, you're there for another 45 minutes. You just kept it there. Well, the enemy of good in racial discussions is perfection, all right? And so don't try to be perfect. Take some of these things that I have talked about in terms of bias and listening, cultural informants, and educating yourself before you open your mouth to have a better discussion. And I'm trying to do what my friend Eric Carson said, that as an orthopedic surgeon, we have to be a vehicle for change. Look, I love foot and ankle surgery. I love what I do. I would have loved to have finished all those cases here today. I would have loved to have took a hike in Monterey, California. But the truth of the matter is, I needed to take this time to speak to a large number of orthopedic surgeons and how we can talk better about race, because frankly, I want you to get started. Whether you dip your toe in the water or you just jump in whole hog like these kids on the right, just get started, okay? Because truly, our lives as African Americans and Black and brown people and people that are underrepresented in forms of being doctors, we need you. We need you because 90% of orthopedic surgeons are not Black and brown, and you're taking care of us. And so instead of making it a political thing or making it some, thing where, oops, sorry, that's my timer to get done. But I just wanted to say thank you for letting me be here. But I just want to also say that how important it is that we need you as majority surgeons to basically please take this seriously and please take the jump, because we need you. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Dr. Stewart, thank you so much. I think one of the unfortunate side effects of these Zoom meetings is that you don't get the applause at the end of a talk like that. But certainly that was wonderful and enlightening. And I think your words absolutely connected with every single one of us. So thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing, and for helping us be better people.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much. It was my privilege. Maybe I'll still get out there one time.
Please do. California borders are still open.
That's right. Take care.